All right, welcome back. Now back to the U.S. election. Now, the former U.S. Vice President Joe Biden is leading President Donald Trump in the 4 key swing state polls just 48 hours before Election Day. We've asked Professor John Stremlau from the Wits University and to help unpack this for us. Professor, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, we've seen Joe Biden currently leading over President Donald Trump. But remember that back in 2016, Hillary Clinton also had a clear lead over Trump for the better part of the 2016 campaign. Surely this does not guarantee Joe Biden a victory, does it?
Well, there's no guarantee. And you remind me painfully that I was on SABC the night before the announcement of the results in 2016 were made, and I was confident that Hillary Clinton would win based on the polling at that time. The polling is much more sophisticated now, particularly in the battleground states that account for these electoral votes that determine the outcome rather than the popular vote in the peculiar U.S. system. But it's also the fact that Joe Biden has got a much more solid lead consistently in each of these states. And so I'm fairly confident The Economist has a 96% chance, and 538, the big polling composite organization, has 90% chance that it'll be Biden and Harris.
Let's talk about the polls themselves. Is there a danger that the polls may be undercounting or even overcounting the Democratic and Republican support, and taking into cognizance that back in 2016, these Swiss state polls severely undercounted Trump supporters?
That's true. And one of the things that is not often commented on is that the polling right now does create the atmosphere that if Donald Trump tries to steal this election, as he's threatened to do, I refuse to leave office. We can't trust the polling result. I mean, the voting results. There's fraud everywhere. Mail-in ballots are going to be fraudulent. The polling would make it very hard, I think, to credibly tell the nation that Joe Biden, who seems to be quite widely popular against the backdrop of Trump's mishandling of the COVID crisis and his unwillingness to concede that climate change is a problem, and his character issues, these are all compounded. And so as a result, I think if there are credible reports of a Biden lead in some key states, that it's going to be very hard for Trump to turn it around and persuade everyone that, oh, no, it's being stolen from him.
Why are the key swing states, Professor, so important? Is it a particular demographic that appeals to each party, or is it simply the numbers?
Well, you're raising a very important point for South Africa, because here we're not as polarized as in the United States. The polling suggests that some 90% of the Republicans think that Biden would mean socialism for America, and 80% of the Democrats think that Trump continuing would mean a dictatorship for America. It's really very, very polarized. Although the good news is that some 90% of the voters say that they wish the country was less polarized. So go figure that one out. But it makes it very critical that some of the states that are contested lively, California is going to vote for Biden no matter what. New York's going to vote for Biden no matter what. The South, former segregationist states that are white predominant, they're going to vote Republican. But those Midwest states, the Rust Belt states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, they are contested, and that's where the election is likely to turn, plus Florida and Arizona, a couple of other states.
So how big of an impact has this coronavirus had on the run-up to the elections? Because we know that in some key states, in particular in Texas, some drive-through votes have been cancelled.
Well, great question, because the COVID is really the #1 urgent issue. And for Biden, it's meant that he could de-ideologicalize this thing and say this is a matter of science, a matter of public health, because they are spiking now to over 90,000 new cases a day, which is incredible. America's already had 20% of the cases and a little more than that of the deaths, when it's only 4% of the people of the population of the world. So that really Donald Trump is being held accountable for the mishandling of the COVID crisis, even though his base believes what he says, what the COVID is no threat. You get over it like I did. Of course, he had the superb medical treatment and helicopters and everything else that the government, the White House would give him. But nevertheless, and experimental drugs, nevertheless, I think it's going to mean that his defeat is inevitable, whereas if the COVID had not occurred, he would run on the economy and might, in fact, have been in a position to win a second term. But that's, I think, now beyond the point.
And President Trump is seemingly unfazed with the fierce criticism leveled towards his administration over how his administration has handled the coronavirus.
Well, I think you can say that Donald Trump is really concerned about himself and kind of delusionary in that regard. Yes, he is running around saying COVID is no threat. It's going to go away after November 4. That doctors are inflating the numbers because they make more money on it, which is absolutely, totally absurd. I mean, he is really, really unhinged right now, and he's not offering anything other than his own praise for himself and his loyal followers. But his approval rate has never been over 43%, and it's come a couple of times a little higher than that, but it's 43% now. No one has ever won an election below 48%. So we'll see what the approval rates really translate in terms of Biden and Trump. But the COVID crisis is he's just pretending it's going to go away, and I don't think with the number of deaths in America exceeding 230,000 that it's going to be the case at all. It's spiking right now and going to get worse.
Professor Stremlau, what would your impressions be of the overall content of the campaigns themselves? I mean, do you get a sense that this was simply a battle of characters of the leading candidates, or was it simply a battle of policy?
Well, it's a combination. It's really character, but it's character with a difference. That is, Joe Biden has sought to unify the country. Joe Biden represents what we South Africans would think is an inclusionary, a country that belongs to all who live in it, united in its diversity. Donald Trump has run the most ethnically nationalist, white supremacist campaign I've ever seen in my lifetime. And segregation and race has defined America since its very founding with slavery. And so therefore, he has tried to appeal to those white, rural, Christian conservatives, predominantly states that have quite a few electoral votes, that he will bring back America in their image. It's a very backward-looking approach, whereas Joe Biden, for the matter of character, wants unity and healing and says, I'm going to represent all Americans, not be divisive. Joe Biden could have tackled Donald Trump by offering an alternative rather than a unifying, non-ideological approach. It was a bold, actually, a strategy by Biden, and it seems to be working.
Now, do you think that those approaches tell the whole story? I mean, many American choices don't necessarily align to their party registration. I mean, the polls show that Republicans have heeded President Donald Trump's warnings on mail voting, and that means that the early Democratic surge could give way to a Republican surge come Tuesday, isn't it?
Well, that's true, and that's what has been part of this very perplexing assessment. There's been 90 million votes already cast, a lot of them for the first-time voters, a lot of them younger people and turning out, and predominantly Democratic. I mean, it's estimated that the split, the Democrat-Republican, is 60-30 for the early voting, and because they're afraid of COVID, and the Democrats take COVID much more seriously. Republicans will show up on Election Day, as Donald Trump has urged them to do. And so initially on the morning of November 4th, Thursday morning, we'll be hearing early returns that may sound very positive for Donald Trump. And then the question becomes, can there be integrity in the counting process? Will people vote and then wait to hear the results? Because in states that are really critical, like Pennsylvania, they don't start counting until after the polls close on Tuesday night. And so therefore, it's going to take several days to clarify, unless it's a blowout, unless there really is a landslide in favor of the Democrats. And we will know that, I think, by early Thursday morning here, because we'll have the Florida results and a few other key states to at least be bellwethers. But it could go, if they're close, it could go for many days. and ultimately end up in the Supreme Court. But that contingency is not given very high probability by those who have done the simulations of possible electoral vote combinations. Donald Trump really has to clear the boards of all the swing states if he's going to overcome what is Joe Biden's lead.
Now, Professor, it's safe to say that Joe Biden's fate may be tied to, strong turnout among the black voters in the battleground state. And then on the other hand, we've seen President Trump and the Trump campaign trying to appeal to the black voters in the United States. We've seen some black celebrities and musicians coming out in support and apparently endorsing President Trump, despite all the issues and the outbursts that have been recorded of Trump against the black people. Do you think that will work in his favor?
I want to make this fundamental point, which I think South Africans will appreciate, namely, if America was still the country that its founders created, white male property owners, Donald Trump would definitely win a second term. But the 19th Amendment in 1920 that gave women the right to vote, and women are going to be critical in Biden's win, and the 1965 civil rights laws that gave blacks guaranteed voting rights, although the Republicans have chipped away at those voting rights. Nevertheless, they are going to turn out in full numbers, I'm convinced, along with young people and now seniors who have been affected by COVID. And that combination will guarantee Biden-Harris a win, in my estimation. But I could be proven wrong because elections are unpredictable.
Well, the Democrats are now hoping for a bright spot in the younger voters. Just from 2016 to now, do you think that the Democrats perhaps are still appealing to the young voters as they did back in 2016?
They're probably appealing much more successfully now, and one of the big reasons is that climate change has really seized the imagination. We've had fires and floods and hurricanes, and people are recognizing that the climate is definitely changing. Donald Trump is a climate denialist. Joe Biden says he'll make rejoining the Paris Climate Accord and helping the Green Climate Fund, which would help Africa, a priority, and he'll do that straight away. And I think that's a fundamental issue. There was a wonderful anecdote about a young woman who was 17, and her dad was saying he was voting for Donald Trump, and she appealed to him and said, "Dad, why don't you vote for me? Because my future generation needs to come to terms with climate change." And that's emblematic, I think, of what this election is really all about.
All right, Professor John Stremlau from the Wits University, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for your analysis on this matter.
Thank you.
And this is The Globe on SABC News. Thank you so much for joining us.